In 19th century USA, who was influential in psychology? How did Calkins and Lad Franklin contribute to psychology? The 19th century was a period of extreme inequality in higher education, with explicit exclusion, racial stereotypes, and systemic barriers preventing African Americans and women from accessing psychology and other academic fields. However, early pioneers persisted. Figures like Mary Whiton Calkins, Christine Ladd Franklin, and Frances Sumner fought for their place in academia, paving the way for future generations of psychologists. Their struggles highlight the importance of inclusion in education and remind us of the ongoing work needed to ensure equal access to learning and professional opportunities for all. When discussing influential figures in early American psychology, one name that cannot be overlooked is Mary Whiton Calkins. Despite her groundbreaking work and intellectual accomplishments, she faced significant barriers simply because she was a woman. Calkins studied under some of the greatest minds in psychology, including William James and Hugo Münsterberg, yet she was never awarded a doctorate, despite completing all the necessary requirements at Harvard. At the time, Harvard refused to grant doctoral degrees to women, a policy that reflected the systemic exclusion of women from higher education and professional recognition. However, that did not stop her from making history. In 1905, she became the first woman elected president of the American Psychological Association, marking a milestone for women in psychology. As her academic interests shifted toward philosophy, she continued to break barriers. In 1918, she became the first woman elected president of the American Philosophical Association, an equally prestigious achievement. Calkins was a trailblazer in psychology, but her path was far from easy. Her story highlights both the barriers women faced in higher education and the persistence needed to overcome them. Calkins began her undergraduate studies at Smith College, a women's college, where she excelled academically. But her true passion for psychology developed when she attended classes with William James at Harvard. Around the same time, he published his famous textbook, The Principles of Psychology, in 1890. James had a profound influence on her, but he was not an experimentalist. Calkins wanted hands-on research experience. Despite being barred from official student status at Harvard due to her gender, she pursued her education with determination. She completed an important dissertation on association, a critical area of psychological research. Seeking more experimental training, Calkins turned to Clark University, where she worked under Edmund Sanford in the laboratory that Stanley Hall had established. This experience gave her exposure to cutting-edge psychological experiments. Later, she returned to Harvard to study with Hugo Münsterberg, further deepening her expertise in experimental psychology. Although she was denied a Harvard PhD, Calkins made significant contributions to psychology and philosophy, proving that determination and intellect could break barriers, even when institutions refused to recognize them. One of her most famous achievements was her invention of paired associate learning, a memory technique that remains relevant today. This is a method designed to strengthen memory associations. Calkins investigated various factors that influence memory, such as frequency, how often something is repeated; recency, how recently information was learned; vividness, how striking or distinct information is; and primacy, how well we remember the first items in a sequence. Her research revealed that frequency was the most important factor in developing associative strength. Imagine you're learning word pairs, like snow and alligator. First, you are shown all the word pairs. Then you are shown one of the words in a pair and asked to recall the other word. You receive feedback, and correct answers are reinforced. Over multiple trials, you strengthen the connection between the pairs of words. Eventually, you would memorize and recall them instantly. This technique is still used today in education, language learning, and even cognitive therapy. Calkins's research not only expanded our understanding of memory and learning, but also paved the way for future studies in cognitive psychology. Her work proves that great minds can leave a lasting impact, even when institutions refuse to recognize them. Christine Ladd Franklin was a remarkable woman who made significant strides in both psychology and mathematics, all while challenging the deeply entrenched gender barriers of her time. She was an American psychologist and mathematician who fought tirelessly for gender equality in academia. At a time when higher education was largely inaccessible to women, she refused to accept the status quo. Lad Franklin was known for her social activism, passionately advocating for increased opportunities for women in undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate education. She faced countless obstacles in her career. Despite her qualifications, she was repeatedly denied teaching positions at universities simply because she was a woman. But she didn't stay silent. She directly confronted the systemic discrimination she faced. One of the most notable examples was her protest against Edward Titchener's exclusion of women from his exclusive group of experimentalists. Titchener, a leader in experimental psychology, refused to admit women to his professional meetings, barring them from important discussions and networking opportunities. Lad Franklin wrote to him in protest, challenging his stance and advocating for the inclusion of women in scientific discourse. Her determination helped pave the way for future generations of women in psychology. Though she faced rejection time and time again, her advocacy contributed to the slow but steady progress toward gender equity in the field. Lad Franklin's legacy is not just in her contributions to psychology, but also in her relentless fight for equal opportunities in academia. She serves as a powerful reminder that progress is often made by those who refuse to accept injustice. How do you think Christine Ladd Franklin's activism influenced the role of women in psychology today? What barriers still exist for women in STEM fields? Ladd Franklin's journey through academia was filled with challenges, yet she persisted, leaving a lasting impact on psychology and mathematics. Like Mary Whiton Calkins, she began her education at a women's college, Vassar, where she graduated in 1866. Determined to continue her studies, she attended Johns Hopkins University in the 1870s, where she worked toward a doctorate in mathematics. In 1882, she completed all the requirements for her PhD, but there was one problem. Johns Hopkins refused to award her the degree. Why? Because she was a woman. It wasn't until 1926, over 4 decades later, that the university finally granted her the doctorate she had rightfully earned. Despite these barriers, Ladd Franklin made significant contributions to the field of psychology, particularly in visual perception. Without access to a lab, another consequence of institutional sexism, her work was mostly theoretical. She studied with some of the leading figures in vision science, including Johannes Müller and Hermann von Helmholtz, and developed important theories on color vision. Her perseverance in the face of exclusion is a testament to her brilliance and determination. Even when institutions denied her opportunities, she found ways to contribute to scientific knowledge. Christine Ladd Franklin made significant contributions to the study of vision, particularly in the development of her evolutionary theory of color vision, which she published in 1929 in her book, Color and Color Theories. Unlike previous theories, Ladd Franklin's model proposed that color vision developed gradually over time, evolving in distinct stages. Her theory was based on both evolutionary biology and experimental psychology, suggesting that human color perception evolved in a specific order. Achromatic vision, black and white, appeared first. In early evolution, organisms needed to detect light and dark contrasts for survival. This was essential for navigating the environment, detecting movement, and distinguishing between safe and dangerous surroundings. This explains why even in low light conditions, humans can still see shapes and outlines in grayscale. Blue-yellow sensitivity appeared second. As species evolved, they developed the ability to detect colors beginning with blue and yellow. This intermediate stage allowed organisms to differentiate objects beyond just black and white, which would have been advantageous for distinguishing between sky and ground, day and night, or edible and toxic substances. Red-green sensitivity developed last. The final evolutionary stage involved the perception of red and green, which Ladd Franklin believed was the most fragile and most likely to be lost due to color blindness. This part of the spectrum is the most complex in human vision, requiring more advanced neural processing. She argued that this is why red-green color blindness is more common than other types of color deficiencies. This theory is important because she challenged dominant theories at the time, particularly the Young-Helmholtz trichromatic theory and the Herring opponent process theory, by introducing an evolutionary perspective. Her theory suggested that color vision was not static but developed over time, providing a more dynamic and biologically rooted explanation. It also explained why some types of color blindness are more common than others, based on how color perception evolved. Despite being overlooked in her time due to gender discrimination, Lad Franklin's work remains influential in discussions of vision science and evolutionary psychology.